Chris is going to be out.
That's right, he's got it in the country,
Right. And Eric is following.
Yeah.
You saw the note, that lady.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to
I have no idea,
Okay.
but it's good that we only got 2 spots to fill at this point.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We'll open up the Budget Committee meeting of March 28th, 2002. We'll start with the roll call. Just first, do the roll call first here. Mr. Lesavoy? Here. Mr. Lamartina is here. Mr. Caddy? Here. Mr. Hickey? Here. Mr. LaBranch?
Here.
Mr. Wolf is excused. Jason, I have not heard anything from him, so I'm assuming he's not here. Not here. Mr. Carpenter is here. Here. And Mr. Swanson is here. And Mr. Ward. Here. Yeah, all right. Next item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. The next item on the agenda is public comment. I will open public comment at 6:31. Anybody in the public want to make a comment? Okay. Seeing no members of the public in attendance, I will close public comment at 6:31. Okay. The first item on the agenda that we have there is the town budget. So, Mr. Tappan, would you like to take the stand and the current financial status, and then we have some questions, I believe, for you.
Okay. So I have answers for your questions all pre-prepared.
Can you speak a little louder? I'm sorry.
I have answers for your questions pre-prepared because I got them in the email you had sent to me. And I was uncertain based on what I saw from you, I think it was yesterday, your email, if you had received my email in response the very day you sent it. You sent me something on March 17th. I was actually preparing to leave at that point for vacation. So I responded saying that I would get back to you as soon as I returned, and I was going to reach out to a couple of directors who were, a couple of the questions that you asked were in relation to their departments, which I did. So I have that information for you tonight. So, in terms of financial status, we are in pretty good shape. We're tracking according to now. The thing that I noticed in your email is that you sent out December's information for everybody. So I grabbed my December information and was planning to speak on that. But I can tell you that January and February also are tracking according to typical results year over year in terms of expenditures as well as revenue collection.
The last thing I kind of got from you and Steve was that we would only get them quarterly now.
Oh, okay.
Is that not true?
All right. So you're starting to sound like my staff that I can't remember anything. So apparently, no, that is true, and thank you for reminding me of that. Of course, I'm always looking monthly. Sometimes I'm looking earlier than that. But anyway, so yes, we are tracking according to schedule.
Did I just give you a kind of a loophole here?
No. You gave me another one of those. Oh, I stepped in it again. The one thing that sometimes you'll run into when looking at any of these reports is certain lines will be above what would be a typical maximum. So say, for instance, in December, you would expect to see 50% maximum spend. And the reason why in most cases it's higher than that, if it is higher, is because you have things that you've already encumbered money for. And so it'll show up as that expense line will be higher than it might be otherwise, because when you encumber it, treats as if you've already spent the money. Okay. In terms of your, I think you had 4 questions that you asked me, but then you also asked another question prior to this last email, and it was in regards to the indirect cost.
Yeah, I
in the
believe the
audit.
question was just an explanation of what that line was, what that
Yep.
indirect cost
Yeah,
actually.
and I believe I answered, but I thought I'd mention it anyway, since we weren't able to get together at the last scheduled meeting. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So the indirect costs, essentially, we've never used that money for administrative purposes. And the reason is simply because when I say we, I'm speaking for the town administration in general, because I haven't been here that long, obviously. But it seems to have been the general policy that that money shouldn't be used for administrative overhead, but rather it should go towards the project costs. And so that's why they've never opted to use it. The de minimis costs.
Can you give me an example of what an indirect cost is?
Well, in this case, what they're talking about is essentially it's money that's used for administrative overhead. So let's just say I'm spending time in the finance department writing up all of this, tallying up the figures, putting it, submitting paperwork to the federal government or whomever. And that time is then allocated and accounted for and then charged against the project.
But
So
that
you
comes
were
out of your
used-
regular, out of the salary line, I assume, right?
Well, so that's how we look at it.
Okay.
And so that's how the town has looked at it historically. But you are allowed, technically, under those rules, to use 10% of that to pay for that time.
Okay,
Okay.
so basically it's a line item that we don't use because
It's
the
not a
money is
line item,
allocated somewhere else.
it's a rule that we simply have decided not to take advantage of, if you will.
Okay.
Okay? Because we'd rather see that money go to the project costs. And in particular, I mean, most of that, the grant monies that we're talking about are water and sewer related. And so Sean in particular has wanted to not spend those funds on overhead. He wants to use them on the projects, which I'm frankly in agreement with. Because as you noted, we have line items for salaries.
Mhm.
So that's the answer to that question. You asked about, so you had a kind of a compound question here about the fire truck, the new fire truck to the fleet, whether we traded it in or not. And then there was a concern about not having room in the town garage because of this for water, wastewater vehicles. So that's the first few questions, so
Mhm.
I'll answer those now. I think we're conflating a couple of the two things. One, where the fire truck, we weren't going to get any money back from that. So in order to improve the ISO rating for the town, the fire department's ability to actually prevent fires or fight fire in this community, they decided to keep that as a reserve engine, which improves the profile of the community and also gives you this extra resource, because they would have gotten a $0 for it, according to the fire chief. In terms of the space issue, the water, wastewater, and fire really have nothing to do with each other in terms of storage. They're not storing vehicles, and never have stored vehicles from that department in fire. And then in terms of the water, wastewater, wanting to have a separate facilities, that also has nothing to do with vehicles, just to make that clear. It's really about making sure that there is storage space available for equipment, particularly for water. So they're overflowing in the locations where they have this equipment, or it's just staying outside, which is worse. So what Sean wants to do is to have a facility where you can actually store this stuff, keep it out of the weather, so they're not doing things like pulling out of a snowbank or chipping ice off of it in order to, make it usable when they need it in the event of a problem. So that's what the discussions around a new facility are focused on. And let's see. And finally, you asked about the impact of salt, gas, and diesel price increases. So I wasn't sure if you meant impact so far or future impact, which makes me nervous.
Well, I think the intent was, how is it going now to budget? But kind of sounds like you may have some concerns about the future here.
Well, honestly, if you don't have concerns about the future, something's not right.
No, they don't.
Because I'm very concerned about the future. But, and I would say we've seen this sort of thing before, but that's not true. I was thinking that up until Russia invaded Ukraine, and now all bets are off. Let's deal with salt first. In terms of salt prices increased fairly dramatically, I think, during the budget process. You guys already heard that, so this isn't news to you. And it's more based on supply chain than anything. So where that's going to go in the future, it's uncertain. I was doing some research just to see, gee, where's this going to go? And we're the second largest salt producer in the world, China being the first. Our relations with them aren't that great at the moment, so who knows? I do think, though, that as being the second largest producer, it's quite possible that things will improve as we've continued to come out of this COVID pandemic and our supply chains start opening up. And then you throw onto that the employment situation in terms of, market squeeze and how many people we have actually re-entering the market. So, it's the impact in the short run has been that it's, the roadways and sidewalks budget has taken a punch in the gut.
So I guess my question is, are you over budget for this calendar or for this fiscal year at this point?
Not in general fund, no.
I'm sorry,
we are
what?
not. We're not in general fund, but if I remember right, if you look at the line for roadways and sidewalks, in in December, we were at 94%. And if you remember earlier, that at period 6, you should be no higher than 50% or somewhere thereabout. So, and this was largely a consequence of the salt budget. So, not entirely, but as a good portion of that was a result of that. So it does the good thing for the budget overall is it's not that huge of a budget where it's going to have a major impact on the overall general fund budget.
And based on, so I get the feeling that you feel you have in the general budget somewhere enough monies to make up any overage that you might have.
Correct.
Okay. For the upcoming fiscal year, I assume that I don't have it in front of me, but for the upcoming fiscal year, I assume it wasn't significantly higher than what you've allocated for this calendar year. Is that a true statement?
This is a memory issue, And so I really,
I don't wanna put you on the spot.
I don't feel comfortable answering that simply because I can't remember.
Okay.
But anyway, you know, it's, the salt in and of itself isn't the particular line that's making me nervous. You know, it's,
Well, then, what
it's
is,
more
what is making
the
you
second
nervous?
part of your question, which was,
Gas and
you
diesel?
know, gas and diesel, and electricity, and that's a much more complex problem. Largely, and if it wasn't so expensive to print these up, I would have printed up a whole bunch of these for each of you, because they're, so we get a regular, I think it's a weekly competitive energy services report. Essentially, it's a market summary, anywhere from, you know, 1 to 6 pages. And it takes a look at what's happened over the, you know, month, or sometimes it'll look over the last year, and then give me a sense of what's happening in the various energy markets, particularly looking at the different types of fuel, right? So natural gas propane, for example. This one is one of those ones where you're biting your nails, because there are so many factors at work here, and that this started months ago, before the war in Ukraine. And that's because I think that there were already pressures on the Europeans to find other ways of getting natural gas, for example, than just from Russia. So the United States was starting to send tankers over already, long before the war began. And so that was driving up prices, and it was in the United States, and places like New England, New York, get hit particularly hard because we don't have pipelines here. Even when we're talking about gas fields that are, you know, a few hundred miles away. So anyhow, when you add then the problem of the war on top of that, it just compounds the problem that we were already experiencing. I was thinking, before this war began, that it was kind of a speculative market, not dissimilar to what happened during 2007, I think it was. And I remember I was buying fuel for communities then, and we couldn't figure out what was happening. And it turned out to be market speculation in the extreme. If you remember right, if you think back to then, I think we were looking at gas that was around $4 a gallon, and we were worried it was going to go to $5 at one point. And so, Jan and I were just talking a few minutes ago, back then, I stayed out of any contracts that year because I was so afraid of locking us into something for more than, you know, a few months, and then having everything drop back down to reality, and essentially having screwed the community by, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars just because I locked us in. So anyway, we're in the next few months going to be looking at trying to figure out, well, we're looking at trying to figure out now what we're going to do for the next few years, because our contract is going to be up for energy purchasing, and we've got to make a decision. So it's a lot more complicated and difficult than I was, you know, it has been in the last few years. So we're still thinking it through, to be honest, and I don't know what the impact is going to be on our budget. I want to mention this one other thing, just for your edification. You already know this. The community, well, not the entire community, the town and its facilities went through an energy efficiency investment process, right? Spent a lot of money and did major improvements to improve the energy efficiency of the facilities. All good. The concern that I have is, last year, as we were preparing for next year's budgets, we were looking at what our savings had been, and we started making adjustments as a result of that. Because that's the whole purpose of having done this, was to save energy and lower your costs. Now, I'm not looking so intelligent because we have a war going on, and we already had, like, as I just mentioned, we already had market pressures. So I'm not a nail biter, but I would be if I were. So, you know, it's not that I think that it's going to crush our budget, but I think it puts undue pressure on the budget because of the energy challenges that we're facing.
So are you more concerned about the upcoming calendar year?
Correct.
Question?
Yeah.
Yep.
So I would think if you have unanticipated increases like salt or energy that you didn't contemplate maybe during the budgeting process because things have changed, that, you know, at some point you'd step back and just try to forecast what you think the impact's going to be in the upcoming fiscal budget. Like energy, we think there's going to be X, Y, Z, you know, variation from what we anticipated. I just looked at the road and sidewalk, it was 7% up from the prior year.
Right.
So presumably salt's more than that, right?
Yes.
Right. So it seemed like the thing to do would be to try to figure out, you know, with what we know right now, how big a bite this whole thing is.
Right. So that's my next, those will be the next steps, well before we start even preparing for to spend the next year's budget. And then begin, you know, preparing the next budget for the next year. Anyway, not to depress you, because I think, you know, these things are crazy. They, you know, for example, you could have a diplomatic breakthrough with Venezuela. Crazier things have happened, and we could end up having, you know, oil prices drop back down to where they were a year ago. So you just never know. And in fact, that's kind of what I've been thinking a lot about and watching to see, well, what am I seeing out there in terms of our relations with Venezuela? Because it's a huge source of oil, and we haven't had access to it because we've, you know, chosen essentially to embargo them. But we'll see what happens. So, but we will be doing that analysis, or I will be doing that analysis for our budget. So, good question.
Any questions?
I have questions on the first two issues that Bill spoke of. Bill, in regard to the fire truck,
Yep.
At what point now will the town take a look and say, this is a 2001 truck and we need to replace it? Because we've just purchased a, what, $650,000 fire truck.
Yep.
And we're increasing our fleet. So, and it's probably not a fair question to ask you, but something maybe you could go back and get the answers to, as far as when will we see a need for another new fire truck?
That is a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, no, and you know, in all fairness, I mean, I'm listening to you talk about it, I'm saying to myself, okay, we generally purchase a new vehicle because one of the existing vehicles has outlived its life expectancy.
Right.
But in this case, we're keeping the vehicle. We've basically added a vehicle to our fleet, but the vehicle we kept is probably still the oldest one of the fleet. So when is, you know, CIP or you know, the town going to come back and say we need to purchase another vehicle? That's the first question I've got. And like I say, I don't expect you to really have an answer. You'd probably have to talk to someone else about this. The other question is in regards to the water or wastewater situation. If they're talking about putting up another structure or a building or a garage or what have you.
Right.
Is that something that you believe will be passed on strictly to the ratepayers?
I don't, oh, boy. I'm, okay.
Again,
so let
you
me,
know,
let me put in a caveat here, which isn't necessarily going to make me look good, but I just came off vacation and I returned last night. So,
No,
and
that's
I was
fine.
trying to bone up as much as possible so that I would have intelligent things to say to you. In terms of that, the first thing that popped into my head was that we've been talking about structures for storage, and we were looking at somewhere around, I think, $30,000, $50,000, something like that. Now, these are relative, I mean, we're almost talking sheds, essentially. And so I believe that I may have to come back to you with a correction. But I
that's fair.
believe that when Sean and I were discussing this prior to my departure, we were talking about capital reserve funds that were there and that could be used for that purpose. I could be wrong, but those were, I think what we were trying to do is put together some information from companies that produce these so that we could get reasonable bids. So, and it's really about making sure that he's, protecting equipment, that sort of thing.
Okay,
So
thank
if
you.
he watches this and comes to my office and freaks out tomorrow, we'll know I was really off. But that's my recollection, and I'll correct that if I'm wrong
Okay.
with Joe.
Okay. That's all I got.
Any other questions?
I think there's additional questions there on the extra fire truck, specifically, probably stuff that you can't answer again, and I'd just throw it out there because obviously if there's an additional truck in the department at this point, there's gonna be additional costs to that. Carrying costs, insurance, et cetera, that potentially wasn't in the budget. So I think there's some follow-up there.
Yeah.
No, I mean, you got to put equipment on another truck. All the things that come
Sure.
along with another truck that wasn't necessarily in the plan. That's going to add expense. And eventually, that truck becomes kind of, I think, where you were going with this, becomes what we have.
Mhm.
Now we need to replace that one too.
Right. I'm gonna deflect that
Yeah,
to
no,
my,
I-
to my
understood.
colleague.
Understood. It's probably not
But I
something.
do
you can
think
answer.
that we actually figured that into the budgeting process, because
Okay.
we knew we were gonna be receiving a truck this year. And as part of that process, we normally will check with our insurers so that we know what our cost increases are gonna be, if any, and then we're figuring in maintenance costs as part of that. So but again, that's not really my area of expertise. I do know, however, that back to your question earlier, there are metrics that they use in order to figure out, okay, size of community, likelihood of, fire or fire risk, and then figuring out what they need in terms of staffing, equipment, and so on. And I believe that's what ISO standards that I was speaking of earlier speak to.
So if we get a better ISO rating, does that help us financially anywhere? Or how does that impact
It's
us?
funny, I don't know that that's really true, no. I
Okay.
think what it does is it helps our insurance rating. But in terms of our financials,
For insurance rating, like insurance for what the town pays for?
correct, I think
Okay.
they would take that as, they may or may not. I haven't asked Primex if they use that, but when we were discussing this earlier today, the ISO requirements were part of that discussion. And honestly, I didn't even know ISO, I've worked with ISO related to IT and manufacturing. I had no idea that ISO even looked at fire. So,
Wonder if it helps the community itself as far as the tax rating for the taxes they pay on their homes. I know proximity to a fire hydrant does. I wanted the ISO
Right,
rating helps.
sure.
So it may help residents.
I don't know, I'm speculating.
You'd like to know if we're keeping the truck and it's improving our ISO rating, like who gets the benefit, what's the benefit?
Well, and are we keeping the truck as a loaded truck ready to go, or are we keeping it somewhere running in case we needed it? Because another truck is taken out of service.
Sounds
as a
like we're
reserve.
spare.
Yeah, that's what.
Sounds like we're keeping it because we didn't get anything for it.
But to Ned's point, is it equipped? Is it not? Yeah.
Right.
So.
It sounds like questions for the next budget committee to follow up on, whoever they may be.
Oh, I'm feeling sick already. I'm just kidding.
Any other questions, comments? I have hopefully a brief question. Okay. I looked through the audit, and I really, it's very complicated, and there's a lot of, words where they just repeat to cover their butts, so I guess whatever. Normally in an audit, there's a section easily identifiable that says, okay, these are the issues that we found. I didn't really I couldn't find that in the audit. Okay, my understanding, there were some issues that were found.
Deficiencies, right?
Hmm?
Deficiencies, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Just
recommendations. I couldn't find it either. I did the same thing.
issues that they find with an audit, they make recommendations, and
Yeah.
and then normally the town or the school, when they have the
Right.
same situation, they address those issues.
Yeah.
Were there issues found in the audit, and if yes, what were they, and what's the proposed resolutions?
Okay. Yes, and that is part of the management letter, so it goes to the council.
So it was not in the audit?
No, it's not in the audit.
Oh,
It's
okay,
not part
that's
of
why
the
I couldn't
audit.
find it, okay.
It's part of the management letter. And the way that this auditor does it, they provide you with that as well as the audit adjustments.
Okay,
Right. So yes,
Get to
there
the-
were. It was this is our first year with this new auditor, so we went from having no findings and recommendations. Well, we had some recommendations the prior year, to having a slew of them, and the new auditors, so they're doing their job.
Can you give us in a nutshell what the issues were and what the proposed resolutions are?
I mean, there were things like you should review your investment policy on an annual basis and make appropriate changes if necessary. So that was done before the audit was even finished, for example. It was recommended that we have more extensive IT-related policies. That has been addressed and is going through the process now.
Can I have, rather than going through can I ask that the budget committee get a copy of that?
That's not really something that's provided to a budget committee. You'd have to ask Steve for that.
We would have to go to Steve
Or the
for that.
council, because it's really for them and for management, not for the budget committee. I'm not trying to be evasive. That's
No,
how
I
it works.
perfectly understand.
But yeah, it was. They had a lot to say.
Okay, I will.
But there were the key thing, and why it's not in the audit is because there were no material deficiencies, and also there's no argument with the way in which we present or record or account for our expenditures and revenue generation. So we're doing things above board and in the proper way according to GAAP. So,
Okay.
but yes, there were recommendations for sure and findings.
Fair enough. Again.
Seems impractical that we would get a copy of the audit without the findings,
You
Yeah,
think
that's not really true.
Well, I mean, I could look.
I've
for
never,
that.
as far as I've been here, and I don't think prior to my arrival, did they provide a management letter to non-management people. So no, I would disagree with you on that.
Well, I don't know if it's an oversight, but I know we've gotten them on the school side before, and,
They've sent you the management letter?
well, I don't know if it was a management letter, but included in the audit that we've gotten from the school in the past, had the deficiencies and you know,
Wow.
superintendent given, we got up there and said, okay, here's how we are going to address these, you know, this is what we're doing. I mean, I didn't think there was anything significant, you know, it was like, hey, somebody's got some extra money in the cash drawer here or something like that, some things like that.
No.
You know, you need better,
Right.
that type of thing.
No, but if that is the wish of the council, then you'll get it.
I will leave
I guess
that
it would
up to the
depend on
next
if they're
budget committee.
germane to the budget, right?
Hmm?
If they're germane to the budgeting process, I guess. is what
I
really-
would say, yeah,
Right.
it's
I
potentially.
mean, things like you need better locks on safe doors or whatever would be maybe germane, or you need to track how you do, I don't know, loans or something might be germane, but things like you need better policies for IT people wouldn't really be germane to us.
Could potentially have an impact on salaries or,
I would think there's findings that could have an impact on staffing or money that we spend, and it would seem very appropriate for us to see it. But if that's not the case, you know, so be it. I couldn't tell much from that audit without seeing that information.
yeah, again, to me, the auditor is just, you know, auditor speak.
Well, the purpose of the audit is really to give you a financial report
Mhm.
of where you stand and where you went from the prior year. So, you know, and then if there were material findings, they would also mention that. So,
They would. So if there were something that was considered a material finding, it would be in that audit report.
to my knowledge, that is correct. We have a CPA here too. So,
Hmm?
yeah, but that letter is coming from them to management to say, hey, this is what we think you could do to improve.
Okay,
So,
fair enough.
anyway.
Any other questions for Bill? Comments? Okay, sir, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the school financial status. You ladies want to?
Seems most of what you're looking for tonight is totally in Jana's wheelhouse, so she'll, you know, be happy to answer any direct questions you have about any of the materials that we sent over to you tonight. I know you had a couple of questions in particular answered one. The other one was related to fuel and busing costs.
Yeah, on food and gas increases in the budget, so I'm
Yep.
prepared to speak
So,
to that.
so would you like us to start with that, since
Yeah,
that was the
that's
question?
as good a place as any to start with.
Okay.
Okay, all right, well, first of all, hello, everybody, hope everyone's doing well, thanks for having us here tonight. The first question, the question that you had asked was actually, what is the impact of food and gas increases on the budget? So the financials that are included in the packet that I sent out are actually the ones for December. They
Right.
closed in December. So I'm in the process right now of preparing my next batch. We present quarterly as well. And I am going to have a much better answer for you with the next batch of financials. But as far as this goes, I've been preparing the board and the budget committee since June of last year for the fact that we were expecting significant variances in our utilities and in propane. We'd looked ahead at the futures. When we budgeted in the fall, I think we factored in, and again, don't quote me, but I knew that there was like a 25% increase on the supply side and a 15% on the delivery side, and that was as of when we were forecasting out. So our next year's budget, we did make a significant, and you probably remember this when we were looking at our utilities as part of the budgeting process, it was a significant increase over this year. But as far as where we're coming in at this point in the year, I know we're going to be over in those two lines. I am not as concerned. I think Bill may have more utilities that are oil-based than we do. We have propane. And we also have some other areas in the budget that that I've started to talk about in this report, but you'll hear more about in the future one, where we're coming in with positive variances because we have some things, programming that we couldn't run. One of the things that has to do with the bus, you'd asked about the bus contract, if we were going to have changes to that. We just did an RFP last spring, so we locked in for 3 years, and there's a marginal increase each year, but we have a contract with them. And in fact, we're going to come in under our transportation contract this year because we had budgeted for 6 buses, and they could not find a 6th bus driver for us. So for up until this month, we've only been running 5 buses. We budgeted for 6. So I have some areas in the budget for this year that make me pretty comfortable saying that I'm not concerned about it this year. As far as next year, you know, Bill mentioned some very volatile factors that are out there, but I think that going into into July, to your point, we usually take a pretty good look at where we think we're going to go with some of our significant expenditures. But on our side of the house, our significant expenditures are labor and benefits. So that's about 80% of our budget, 80 to 85. So we maybe have a little bit more, we don't get maybe as nervous about some of the operational side as the town. I think we are more heavy on the labor part. But as far as the utilities, we do a joint contract with the town. I don't know if Bill didn't mention that. I figure you probably know that. Last time it went out, we bid it together. We hope to continue to do that, but he's met a couple of times with the Consolidated Energy consultant to kind of look at the best way to do that. We have a joint meeting set up later that we're going to get together, and we're going to kind of walk through options, look at some spot rates or a contract. We've got to figure out what might be the best, but you know, we want to be careful not to lock in at a rate that's really sky high, because that's where we're at now, but we also don't want to just ride the market and not know what we're doing. So there's a lot of analysis yet to be done there, but I do think that we'll figure out what's best for the community, and we'll work together to come up with something that makes sense. And gas prices, have they had effect on the bus contract? The answer to that is no. We locked in at a rate. They give us, we have a monthly rate for our 6 buses, and we actually negotiated a reduction because as I said, we were only running 5. So we're going to come in a little bit under budget on our busing contract. Does that answer everyone's question there? And then you had one more question for us. You had responded to Joe in email. So did that information, you guys are all set with that one? The question had to do with bonuses for school employees, and I think you've seen the response to that.
And the monies came out of the ESSER funds, and I've sent that copy of that note to everybody. Everybody okay with that?
Just a quick question. So those bonuses, do they get added to the base?
No.
Okay, so it's a one time.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
And actually, we call them a discretionary bonus because, and it's a little nitpicky thing, but in order to be able to reimburse or to provide that benefit to our hourly employees, it can't be something that we explain in advance or that's planned. It has to be a discretionary bonus. So nobody knew that they were getting those before they came. And I have checked with DOL on that, and so we are good to be able to do that for all of our employees. So those were the only 2 questions we had.
The food services, have any issues with that?
Oh, yes, I'm actually in the process of doing an analysis right now. Food prices have gone up. No question there. We've all seen it in our own shopping carts. But we just were informed, there is some additional money coming down that you'll read about in my next report. The state has shuttled through some additional monies. I mentioned in this report a couple of small grants. If you looked on the revenue side, on the federal side, we got a couple of extra small food service grants. The ones that are coming down are similar in nature to that. We don't know all the details of it, but there will be some. But in addition to that, once again, we're operating under a food service waiver, where every reimbursable meal served to a student is getting reimbursed from the government, so, from the USDA rather. So that has been had a significant impact on, students don't have to pay for the meals, but we're getting reimbursed for them. So if you look at my revenues section here, and you'll see it in the next quarter as well, you'll notice my local food service revenues that I budgeted are way down because kids aren't needing to buy the meals, but the federal side of the revenues are way up because every meal is reimbursable, and usually it was only the free and reduced.
Will that be roughly equivalent? In other words, the increase in one and decrease in the other?
Not necessarily one for one, but what I can say is my preliminary look at it is I don't think it's going to have a significant impact, especially when I looked at in December on the bottom line. I think we're going to be pretty close to where we were because of that increase in the revenues. We've also had an increase in expenditures, but I don't think that we're going to be significantly off from what we budgeted or planned. I'll have a really good, a much better picture for you with the next one. It was a little early in December to really, do that trajectory because we still didn't know if we were going to be in or out with students or,
Yep.
So.
Okay, thank you, Jana.
Yeah, you're welcome. So does anyone have any questions on the questions? No? Or other questions?
I just had one other question. What can you use ESSER 2 money for?
Actually, Susan can probably answer that better, but they have expanded the purpose from ESSER 1 to ESSER 2 and 3 to include some other things like infrastructure. We aren't actually using it for that purpose, but that was one of the reasons that they did expand it. And Susan can talk much more eloquently about what we have chosen to do with those funds than I can. I know that they're allocated.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all of our funds are allocated, and our focus is really on providing additional programming to meet the needs of students. Some of the programming that we had hoped to put in place earlier has been challenging because we advertise for positions and then there aren't any applicants. So, for example, mental health is an area that we all have concerns about given the circumstances. And so in our grant, we had added 2 additional social workers. And we had been advertising for social workers since early in November without applicants. So we were able to finally find a qualified social worker. So we've just filled one of those positions, but the other one is still open. So we can queue up all kinds of programming, but if we don't have the staff to implement it, then it creates challenges, which is one of the reasons why we looked at accessing the grant to provide staff with an appreciation bonus. It's been very, very challenging, not just because of the pandemic and all of the craziness that's gone on around that, but really because we're operating with a shortfall in labor. So, for example, we have been running short between 25 and 30 employees since the beginning of this year. And yet we only have about 6 to 10 substitutes to fill those gaps. So we're constantly running under circumstances that are less than ideal. That doesn't even take into consideration when we have absences, and then how are we going to cover those? So we're moving people around every day just to keep our schools open. And it's created a level of stress and exhaustion that you normally would not have to work under. So because we weren't able to fill those positions, we were getting, we had excess capacity in the grant. And so we had a conversation with the school board about using that, with the capacity that we had accumulated because we couldn't implement those positions, so that we get to the end of the year, we wouldn't have money left over just because of the labor shortage problem. So mental health is one. We have bought, you know, all kinds of tools that staff are using now to help support students, some for learning loss. Others are just technology tools that, you know, when we went remote, we had a need for, and then once the teachers have begun to use those tools on a regular basis, then you want to continue to allow them to do so. So some money has been spent on programming for learning loss and, you know, how do we close the gap. Some has been invested in, you know, what kinds of additional resources do we need to support teachers in the classroom, and of course some for social workers and other supports to help support the social and emotional well-being of students, families, and staff.
I have a question. Question on the acknowledgement bonus or whatever it was. Do you have a dollar figure on that? What it actually?
I didn't bring it here. I hate to say it without looking at it, because I like to be precise. But because we also counted New Hampshire retirement and the federal tax obligation, we rolled those all in. And I'm going to shoot myself for saying it, but I think it was about $212,000 total. But I can get you the exact figure. I'm going from memory there. Forgive me if it's wrong.
No, if that's close, that's fine. I mean, we don't need the exact number, but.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. One thing that, as Susan was talking, I did want to mention, and it is addressed in this December quarterly report, that's really good news, is you folks have heard me talking about the FEMA project many times, the FEMA COVID monies. Initially, we had a claim queued up, and then we were informed that we were not considered to be an essential business, so we couldn't submit under FEMA. The federal government had a change of heart, and we've been working all year with our liaison at the state level to it's a 100% reimbursement for eligible expenditures. So a lot of the FEMA project was aimed more at municipalities, people that have emergency, vehicles and emergency personnel. But we were able to thread a needle and look at what we had to spend on, because we did have to buy masks and some PPE and disinfecting equipment and things like that. And we were able to work with FEMA to put a series of claims in. Initially, we were told that we could only put in claims through September, and I was happy about that because we were still getting some back, but then they extended it. So now, last I learned, it was December was the deadline, so we put in another claim for that, and I just found out today they're extending that deadline through June. So in here, as of the time of this report, I think we had already recouped $154,000 worth, and we are going to be able to recoup some more through the end of the year. So that right there all comes back. We can't expend it because we didn't appropriate it. It's a 100% pure reimbursement of expenditures that we made in our budget. So when I present my next report to you, you'll see revenues, and you're going to see our expenditures, but you're going to see some unanticipated revenues that are coming in against those expenditures. So that's really good news, and it ties into the ESSER because that also was an eligible purpose of the ESSER funding. We could have used that for PPE and things, but we were very strategic about how we used our funding. If we had another source, we tried to save that money for our educational purposes and try and recoup those costs elsewhere. So does anyone have any questions on the financial report that was submitted with this? It's a little bit stale because it's from December, but you kind of get a sense of where we're going. Nope. All right.
Can you refresh my memory? When you have a budget surplus, you can keep 25%? Is that?
No. The only thing a school is allowed to keep, we have a statute that it just changed this past year. We're able to keep up to 5% of our net assessed value. We only retained 2.5% in the last budget. We're going to be voting on it. So when we bring revenues back in, unless we have appropriated those budgets, we cannot spend those revenues. We would have to have a special hearing in order to do so.
I should know this, but I don't. What was the warrant article that we increased the percentage of what?
That's what I'm talking about, the retained
It was
fund.
5%.
It went to
2.5 has gone to 5.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I don't
Yep.
know. if some
Yeah,
reason I
it
had
was,
it on my 25%.
basically, the voters approved it at 2.5%, but because they specifically wrote 2.5% in the original warrant article, the legislature then changed it so we could retain up to 5. We haven't ever done that. We've never had more than the 2.5, but we wanted to align it with the law.
Yeah, okay.
And we've also never spent that money.
No,
Always returned
never
all
spent it.
year to the-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's there, if we did have an unanticipated expenditure or something, we could access it, so.
Right, and is there like a list of what those funds could be used for, a specific list, or?
The ESSER, are you talking the ESSER fund, sir?
No, the,
Oh, the retained?
yes.
No, that's a very good question. It's not a specific list. It does require an approval process. Prior to this year, you actually had to get the Department of Education to approve you to be able to use that money. Because of COVID, they instituted a waiver because there were so many people that were overexpended, or so many districts, should say, that were overexpended in their budget, that they wanted the school district, the agents to expend to, the board or whomever, to be able to determine when best to use that. But we do have to report that annually as part of our Department of Revenue. So if we were ever to tap that, we would need to make sure that we put that on our report. They would take that into consideration, and that would be public because it would go on all of our MS DRA forms.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Okay, so anything else on the financials? Questions?
No?
Questions on the audit?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any questions on the audit, gentlemen?
Our management letter is included in this
Yes.
packet. So that's our, they call it our governance letter. I think it's the same thing on the town side. We had our auditors come and do a presentation for the school board to answer questions. And all in all, it was a very good audit. We, they said that everything was fairly presented. We didn't have any findings other than and you can see in this letter a couple of recommendations relative to student activities. So we have addressed those. We've done a little education with our staff. And we do training on that. So hopefully those same ones won't appear next year.
Yeah, again,
Yep.
yours, there was nothing, nothing there.
Well, and last year, if you recall, we changed auditors, I think it was last year for the
Yes.
first time, yeah.
You always get a
And
few
you'll get
extra
more-
things.
You'll
Yeah.
get a few extra. It's
Yeah.
always good, I always say it's good every 5 years to switch up your auditors anyways,
Yeah.
because it really, it's prudent to
Yeah.
have new people look at your financials and offer you ways that you can strengthen what you're doing. So I
Right.
think it's just good governance. And so what Bill said is true.
True,
When
yep.
you get a new auditor, you usually do wind up with
Yep.
quite a few more.
Absolutely. We had more last year too, so. So,
Any
anything
other
else?
questions, comments? No?
Thank you.
All
Thank
right,
you, ladies,
great.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a
For
nice
those
day.
of you who we won't see again, I don't know who got off the board. Thank you for all your
They're
support.
pretty much all coming back, so.
Everybody's coming back?
Oh, good.
Joe's
Except
not.
Joe.
I'm
Yeah,
not.
you're going, you're
Yeah.
gonna be getting those management letters from the town, right? You're going to the town council now, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate
Thank
it. Next item on the agenda is the meeting minutes from January 10th. Any,
Okay. I'll make a motion to approve the January 10th.
I so move.
okay, Roger did give me a very minor typo correction.
Okay.
Somewhere we have the word sent instead of spend, but. Okay, so we have a motion from Mike to approve the minutes and a second from Roger. Was it Roger? Any comments, questions? All those in favor say aye.
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 Okay, it's unanimous. next item is any other business. So this is the last meeting of this budget committee. I want to thank you all. It's been a really good experience for me. I'll tell you that, and it's been fun. We probably had a few more meetings than we really needed to have, but I think at the time the thinking was COVID was going to have an impact on everything. That's why we had the monthly meetings. So the next meeting, I'll leave that up to where Mike is the vice chair and he's coming back. From this point, Mike will take over, until we have the next meeting an organization meeting where you pick the chair and vice chair. There is one lady, Danielle something, that was a write-in candidate. She got like 38, 40 votes or something like that, and she did accept the position. Mike and I sent her a note today to just confirm her email ID and things like that. I do have some things. I'll send it to everybody. Basically, a calendar with just some key dates on it. An updated member list. It's not the official member list. Wendy will send you an official one, but maybe something that you guys might want to have, and a copy of the rules, whatever. So,
Thank you for being chair. It's
Yeah, I
quite,
think you did
quite
a
the
great
job I'm
job.
learning.
Yes, thank you.
I think you did a great job. So
Yeah.
my first year was, easy to understand, so.
Communication is key. You did a nice job on that.
Oh, thank you very much. Do you want to pick a date for your next meeting? I didn't
Yeah,
bring
we
a green
should,
calendar.
we could set a date for the next meeting.
Do we want to just make it an organizational meeting, or?
This is what we did last time. We had an organizational meeting, but it's up to you if you want to just do it on your first meeting. It's up to you. Of course, I don't have it in front of me. Do you want to pick a date?
I know we generally do the last Monday of the month, but in April, I will not be here for the last Monday of the month, so.
I had the 11th as a meeting. I don't know.
Yes.
if We originally had.
We did set a date of the
You want
11th
to keep that one?
tentatively
I'm good.
a couple of meetings ago.
Like I said, we can just come in and do the organizational meeting. It'd probably be too quick to get anything different from the town, unless Bill has the answers to the questions that were asked this evening. You want to do that, the 11th?
Yes.
Sure. Yep.
Would it be worthwhile to have council review the,
Right to know laws and.
right to know laws? I'm used to calling it sunshine laws. That's in Florida.
RSA 91.
Yeah,
91A.
the right to know laws, because we haven't had that with a number of people that are relatively new on the committee. And I'm wondering if that might be a worthwhile thing.
Town
Brian,
manager's done
Do you know
that
if the
before.
council's going to have a meeting to discuss that with the new members, or?
Right to know?
Yes?
We just did at a small meeting where we just went over what the role of town councilors, but I don't know if we're doing that specifically. I can ask.
If you could ask, maybe, even though we can just be in the audience to catch that discussion if we want to be.
Okay, I'll email Steve.
Okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, we generally don't have that issue, but it is good to make sure everybody's aware
But
of.
just things like, we shouldn't, if somebody sends out an email,
Don't copy everybody.
even the chair, we
Mhm.
shouldn't do a reply all.
Yeah.
The
Correct.
town manager
I
has
mean-
done the presentation before to the budget committee.
Mhm.
Yeah, actually,
Okay.
Steve could probably do it if he wouldn't.
Yeah.
So maybe we can see if he can be available on the 11th. You're still chair, so you can.
No,
You're
no.
chair until April 1st.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you
So-
want to? I can contact him, or you can. It's up to you.
You're
Could be
chair.
his first act.
I'm the vice
Could be the
chair.
first act of the town council.
I mean, yeah, if you could check with Steve, we're meeting on the 11th, we agreed on that. 6:30, a good time for everybody? 6:30.
Yes.
If he could just come in and brief us on the right to know laws.
All right. I'll do it.
Thank you.
And Amy will be taking over for Gary on the school side.
Yes, Amy Tilton.
I'll be the alternate.
Okay.
Can't get rid of me that easily.
He's the new chair of the school committee. They talk about a glutton for punishment.
Oh,
Yeah.
congratulations.
That's the comment to him about, I know how hard it is now.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so, motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.